I'm Beth Whitworth, race car driving, quilt making, CPA firm owning, wife, mom, and boss. I'm here to help you build a business you love by sharing all of the good, the bad, the ugly, and the excellent sides of working in this industry. It's not always easy, but after many years, I can finally say it's worth it. Let me guide you on your journey to accounting with confidence. I am so happy to finally be starting this podcast. Here we are at episode number 1. If you knew how much time I have thought about this over the last months and years, you would be able to say, hey, why don't you just do it already? I have spent so much time and energy thinking about what it would be like to have a podcast. And now it's here. So here's episode number 1. When I started thinking about this, I thought, well, in the beginning, it seems like a good time to introduce myself. But just telling you the timeline of how I got to this point in my life, I don't think it's that interesting. So instead, I thought I could share with you the things that I learned along the way from the 4 different places that I've worked in public accounting. So, yep, I've only had 4 real jobs. I had some jobs, obviously, when I was in college, when I was in high school, right after college, but my public accounting career started about a year and a half to 2 years after I was even out of school. I learned a lot of things, actually, but I have narrowed it down to these 4 things that I learned from my 4 different firms. So the first thing I learned is that time isn't money. And the second thing is that one bad apple can spoil the whole firm. And the third thing I learned was that not being a good manager doesn't make you a bad leader. So I'll tell you more about that. And then the last one is that no one is coming to your rescue. No one's coming. So let's just jump into my first job in public accounting. Like I said, it was about a year and a half to 2 years after I'd actually graduated. And I did not get a public accounting job right out of college. It was the mid-90s when the male-dominated accounting world was in full swing, but the Big 8 had dropped down to Big 6 at that point. I think we're down to Big 4 now. And firms billed not only by the hour, but by the 6-minute increment. Yeah, that was a tough one to swallow. So I was hired by a local firm. About 20 people was how big this firm was. And they grew. They doubled in size in the couple years that I was there. So they were growing very quickly. And I was hired on as a staff accountant, and I was in the tax department. Tax was what I wanted to do. I didn't want to do audits. Tax was what I was locked into. That was interesting to me. But I hadn't sat for the CPA exam yet. I hadn't had any tax season experiences yet. I was just thrilled to be there. I was so excited to have gotten into my first job in public accounting that I was just ready to, soak it all up. The firm that I was with had 4 male partners. So there was no female partners in this partnership, but in a firm of about 20 people, there was 4 men. And one of I think there were 2 or 3 tax managers, was a woman. And she was the one who actually hired me, and she mentored me. And she was one who I was sort of following behind and seeing that this is what I needed to do to be like her. And like I said, my first job in public accounting, and all I was just there to do was soak it up. So as soon as January hit, so I was hired in the fall, and January came around, and that was a busy season. And immediately there was mandatory overtime for everyone. So it started with Saturdays and a half day on a Saturday. Everybody had to show up, even if you didn't have anything to do, which was really, really awkward because you were there and you really didn't have anything to work on. And so they would just have you work on training, looking at last year's work papers, those types of things that really weren't productive. And all of us would have preferred to be doing something else on a Saturday. So those half days started on Saturdays, and then they turned into full days where it was required. We had to be there for a full day on Saturday. Coming in early and staying late was expected. It wasn't officially stated that you had to put in a certain number of hours a day, but there was just this culture of expectation that if the partners were still there and the managers were still there, then the staff should still be there and they should be seen putting in time. Now, I know just from my own personal experience that all of those hours I was putting in were not productive hours for that firm. Whether or not they billed for them, I can't say. I have no idea. But it definitely was not something that was something the firm could have lived without it, is what I'm trying to say. They didn't need my hours during that tax season in all of those capacities. They didn't need to be paying me or giving me comp time or any of those things, but it was actually happening. And I was probably easily working 60 hours a week, probably more as the deadline got closer. And I just remember the looks in shutting down your workstation and you're getting ready to leave and it's after 9 o'clock at night and you're walking past a coworker, and I hate to say it and don't be offended, men, but usually it was a guy kind of looking at their watch and giving you the look like, you're leaving already? It's after 9 o'clock and I wasn't married. I didn't have any kids at home, but I'd also been there since 7:30 that morning. Any work you do in those types of conditions, as it gets later and later, it's not productive. So that mentality of being seen as opposed to being productive, I didn't love it. And this was, like I said, my first experience into public accounting. And this wasn't one of the big, 6 firms. This was a small regional firm with 20 people. And that really told me that this is probably the norm in public accounting at that time. So the kicker on this was sometime, I believe, I don't remember if it was the first tax season or the second one, but I was working on a Saturday and my mentor was there, the woman who hired me, who was the tax manager. And I remember somebody stopping at my cubicle and saying, hey, you realize she's here working and she's missing her 4-year-old's son's birthday. The party is happening right now and they're having it without her. And I was like, what? What in the world? Why would you work somewhere that you wouldn't even be present for your kid's birthday party? And it wasn't like the kid was 14 and could care less if their mom was at the party. They were 4 and she was missing it so that she could be seen by the partners, just like I was expected to be seen by the managers and seniors to show that I'm putting in my time. And I understand that at the time, the billable hour was the holy grail. It was what was normal and it was what would burn staff out before they even got to a second tax season. And that was what was happening in public accounting. But I remember after that weekend with her missing her son's birthday party that I was just thinking, nope, that is not what I want when I have my own firm. It will not be like this. And I realized that time isn't money. Time spent in an unproductive manner costs you money. It doesn't make you money. And I was never going to be a firm that worked that way. After a couple of years at the first place, I was hired away by another accounting firm. And by this time, I had sat for the CPA exam and I had passed it. I had gotten married. We bought our first house, and that's been our only house. We still live in it. And I was really looking for an exit from the burnout. It didn't take long for that first firm to really burn me out on the time expectations. And it's still a very male-dominated firm that I could see that it was going to take a very long time to move up. So this firm that I moved over to was a small firm. I was the only full-time staff accountant for them, the only CPA on staff other than the 2 partners. And instead of that clock watching mentality, the partners would stop at my door and tell me to go home, if it was after 5 o'clock. They wanted me to be on my way and out the door and have a life. And, they structured their days to where they were getting things that they wanted to happen in their life done. So if they were not morning people and they, wanted to take their time coming into the office, then that's what they did. So there was no expectation there that we were going to watch the clock. Instead, it was, if you take care of you, then you'll take care of the clients. So the difference with this firm, it was a little slow to change. They weren't, super on track with all of the newest technologies. I would have to spend some time just kind of waiting them out to actually get them convinced to make some changes. They weren't even using any type of computerized billing system when I first started. They weren't using QuickBooks. They weren't actually getting bills out on a regular basis to their clients. So I worked on a lot of the internal type of structures for them and kind of brought them into the new age, which at this point, we're looking at late 1990s, early 2000s that we were working through these things that other firms were already well past that. But like I said, small firm. And as we grew and we changed, we started to hire some other accountants. Some ended up being great fits, some not so much. And as a team, we worked together to kind of figure out who made the cut and who didn't, and would make those hard decisions if someone wasn't working out. And then there was a year that we made a hire that was really good on paper, and they were even good in their interviews, and they were good in their first, probably the first couple, maybe 3 months. And then, as they say, the honeymoon was over. And at some point, this individual was starting to show their true colors. So we typically would have hired before tax season. And so this was probably during tax season when these true colors started to show. It's very hard to hide how you really feel and how you really are during a stressful time like a tax season. So there were just some needless to say, the honeymoon was over. And it got to the point where this person, I don't know what else was going on in their life, but they were easily angered. They would just go off on tirades to the staff when something wouldn't print right or when a phone call didn't get connected the way they wanted. There was a time when I had overheard them lying on the phone to the IRS. And that was back when you could get the IRS on the phone, but it shook the culture of the office. I mean, the culture, it just took a nosedive. Nobody wanted to be around this person. Nobody wanted to do work with this person. It was to the point that I wasn't comfortable being in the office alone with them because I just didn't know what was going to happen. And I was starting to lose sleep over it. I was constantly stressed out trying to keep the rest of the team from leaving and hoping clients weren't, going to leave as well because of just this attitude and the fact that the firm itself was just not feeling like a comfortable place. And by this point, I had been a partner with the firm for almost 7 years, and we had a daughter. Our daughter was almost 5 years old, and I was supposed to be the future of the firm. So I talked with my partners. We had discussions about this, and they were going to talk to this person. And ultimately, it came down to my partners did not want to make a change, that the culture in that firm was not something that they cared enough about to change, and that they were not going to do something. And with the two of them, it was 2 against 1. And so I had to make a decision. And at that time, the decision was that I needed to leave. And because the culture was something that was affecting me, it was affecting the team, it was affecting the clients. And I felt like this wasn't a situation where I could just bide my time and hope that my partners came around, that I knew they were slow to change. But this was a situation that it was me or them. And so I left. And I walked away from that partnership that I had invested 10 years into because of the bad apple. That's the moral of the story, is that when you're in a small firm, there is nowhere for a bad apple to hide. Something is going to change. And if you let the bad apple dictate the change, then you're going to lose good people. So I landed on my feet, which I fully expected that I would, maybe not at the time, but looking back now, like there was no doubt. But I ended up in what I would term a short-term partnership with another person. And I learned lots and lots of lessons from this very short-term partnership. But the biggest takeaway was relating to management and management style. This partnership taught me that not being a good manager, and I'll put manager in quotes there, quote unquote manager, does not mean that you're a bad leader. I knew as soon as I went out on my own that I wanted a team. I needed a team. I did not want to be a solo practitioner. I did not want to be that one-man shop. And I was overwhelmed pretty much from the get-go, which is what established a partnership with this person because they had an existing infrastructure. So I was overwhelmed. There was lots of decisions that had to be made, things that had already been in place when I got to the previous partnership, things like what tax software we're going to use, what we're going to name the firm, all of the things. There was so much. And I also felt an overwhelming sense that I needed to prove to the clients that followed me from my previous firm that they made the right decision, that they weren't going to regret it by coming on board with me. So to do that, we needed people. And we had some people. And it was very quickly evident that my partner and I had extremely different management styles. I delegated by dropping and running. Here's the work. Let me know if you have any questions. And that was it. That was how I delegated. And my partner was more of the, hey, let me sit behind you and watch you follow my step-by-step instructions. And once you screw up, I will just make a little noise to alert you that maybe you need to try something different and give you, it was kind of like we all remember taking our driver's test and at 16, 17 years old, maybe some younger, and that individual from the DMV sitting in your passenger seat with a clipboard. That's how I envisioned my team was feeling when my partner sat behind them, that they were having these things that were being checked off and maybe they were passing or failing on certain things. And yeah, that was definitely not me. Like I said, drop and run. I was, let me know if you have questions type of person. And then in our team meetings, there was an expectation from my partner that everybody on the team had to do this recitation of what are they going to work on this week? What day are they going to work on it? How long is it going to take them for everything that they did? Like they were having to justify being employees, essentially. And that expectation was put on me as well. I was expected to give that report to my partner. And that was uncomfortable because I'm not that kind of person. I'm not as detailed, which is why I need a team. I need the follow-through people. I need the people to help me get all the things done. So this would definitely be what I would define as micromanaging. And I couldn't get on board with it. I was told that I wasn't good at managing people. I became known as my affectionate nickname, and we still joke about it, is that I was the bottleneck. And because I wasn't good at managing people is what the implication was. And needless to say, the partnership didn't last. My thoughts about being a bad manager, they stuck around a long time. It took a long time for me to recognize the fact that I wasn't managing people, I was leading people. And I was never going to be a micromanager. And that didn't make me a bad manager. And it also didn't make me a bad leader. I was probably before my time. I was before my time in wanting to create a team of people who wanted to manage themselves, which, thanks to the work I've done with a coach in this last year, that I've learned that having a self-managed team makes a good leader. You want to do that. And I didn't have words for that back at that point, but I knew that I could not be a micromanager, and that didn't make me a bad person. Since then, I have learned to have a delegation process that is a little bit more robust than that drop it and run, which is what I was probably known for, which also wasn't a great management style, but it was, so much more tolerable than having the DMV guy sitting behind you. So finally, my last and final firm, which is the current one that I own and operate, I have been working in it for the last 13 years, which sounds like a really long time. It's longer than I was at the other firms, and this is the last one I'm going to have. So it has not been all rainbows and unicorns. If anybody ever tells you that owning and operating your own business is always going to be a beautiful experience, they are not telling you the truth. And it hasn't been terrible. It has had some terrible moments. But the main lesson that I have learned from that is that, it's a long-term project. But let me tell you the story of how I got to where I am today, which is, it was about 2016, I believe, 2015, 16. I wanted to quit. I was ready to just close the doors. I wasn't happy with my business. I felt trapped. I had a team working for me and they were dependent on their paychecks from me. I had clients that wanted more from me than I could give. I was just out of hours and energy. And I needed to figure out a way to make more money for my own family. And I wasn't in a good place. And I had had a couple of really rough tax seasons. One year we had our offices flood, which would have been fine, except that it was April 7th. And I think you may get from my previous stories that I do tax. So we had a tax firm. And so having your offices flooded on April 7th was pretty catastrophic. And then that year was followed by a tax season where the building we were in changed hands. The landlord changed. It was purchased. And we determined that we were not going to be able to stay here with this landlord. And when we were making these decisions, of course, it was tax season. And we ultimately ended up with about 6 weeks to find a place to move to, get leases signed, get moved. And this was for my business and my husband's business because we share office space. And we found that place, and we found it during tax season, and we started, making all of these moves. And the thing was, it literally tripled our rent in that one move. And yes, it was nicer space, and yes, it was more space, and it was all the things. And we knew we were getting a deal in the original place, but the stress of during tax season having to find and relocate somewhere else, we actually moved after the tax deadline, was super stressful. I was having panic attacks. I was, just so overwhelmed, and I was feeling the pressure. So when things started to settle down, I was just in a funk. And when I get overwhelmed, I know that I actually shut down. Like, it's not just that I procrastinate the things that I don't like and put them off. I absolutely do nothing. So, and I didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to work in my business. I was looking for an alternative. The longer that I did nothing, the more hopeful I was getting that someone was just going to rescue me, that my overwhelm would magically vanish, that there was a magic wand or a silver bullet or something that was going to get me out of the funk, make me like my business again. And I was very frustrated that I couldn't find the answer. I could not find the solution. I felt like I had enough education, enough experience, enough of whatever I needed. I should be able to figure this out. And I couldn't. And I was very, very frustrated. So in about November of 2016, I was still in the funk. And I was doing some CPE, trying to get caught up for the year because CPAs tend to procrastinate that, but we still have to get that requirement done by year end. And the organization that was sponsoring this online class was advertising for a conference that they were doing. And they had a special discount was happening, and it was the cheapest it was going to be. And on a whim, I signed up for it. And I had never been to an industry conference ever. I had never done anything but your traditional CPE classes, where you're learning about QuickBooks, or you're learning about the tax updates, or you're learning about the review standards or whatever. But I'd never been to a conference. And it was scheduled for the following June. So I still had a long time to wait between November and the following June. I had time to second guess myself for, oh my gosh, why did I bother registering for this? Maybe I shouldn't go. And ultimately I went, and it was scheduled for Orlando. So my husband and my daughter came along. So they had some things to do while I was in conferences. And I'm an introvert, and I was not interested in going to meet the people. I just wanted to hear what they had to say. And I attended the sessions, and I kept to myself, and I was really, really hopeful that any of the small group breakouts were going to be really short, or that I could somehow sneak out of them. And you know what happened? I actually got excited about what I was learning. I shocked myself. I was hearing things that could make my firm better. I could learn things that was making me a better leader. And ultimately, I was seeing that I could work on my business and not hide from it. And I would come back to the hotel room after the sessions, and I'm sure my husband was absolutely sick of hearing me just go on and on and on about what I learned and what I can do and I want to put this in practice, and going through my notes and what should I work on first. And that was probably the first time in a long time that he had heard me excited about my accounting firm. And then at that conference, I took the next step, and these people are great, and they're great marketers. And I'm sure many of you have probably heard of them, and I'm not an affiliate of them, but Joe Woodard is a mastermind of knowing what accountants need and what's next and selling to them. And so I took that next step, and I signed up for a year-long commitment on building a better practice. They were just launching this program. It was the first that they had done it, and it was scheduled to start in September of that year. September, so this would have been 2017, and it was going to be a year-long program. There were books to read, there was homework to do, there were business plans that I needed to work on, and pricing strategies, and the dreaded working in small groups that we all know of and hate from being in high school and college, that small group work is never our thing. And then you add into it that we're all a bunch of accountants and we're introverts, and it seems to be sometimes difficult to work in these groups. But I was able to set goals for my firm. I met some amazing mentors and peers and people I still keep in touch with from my cohort. And it set me on a path that hasn't ended. That conference and that course changed the trajectory of my practice. In a sense, it actually changed the trajectory of my life, because I was in that place where I wanted to quit. And while I was waiting for the rescue, The rescue was actually waiting for me. I just needed to take the step, and I needed to reach out and realize that I didn't have to do it alone. And I didn't have to be a business that had to be in a partnership to succeed. So since then, I've continued attending the conferences. I work on personal development. And most of all, I recognize sooner when I need to make a change. No one's coming. No one's coming to the rescue. It's my firm and it's my job to make it work for me. That's it. No one's coming. And so now I absolutely recognize that in my business, it's up to me to make it what I want it to be. So that's it. Those are my 4 takeaways from my 4 firms, including my current one. And just to recap, what did I learn? I learned that time is not money. I now have a firm where everyone, even me, works part-time. We have no mandatory overtime, and we actually have no overtime at all during tax season. No one works more than 40 hours a week in my firm, ever, and we still do a tax season. The other thing I learned from that second firm was to get the bad apple out of the barrel. Small firms cannot absorb bad energy, and it eats away at the team until you lose good people. Hiring and firing isn't easy, so it's critical to develop those skills. And it has been such an important part in building a firm that I love now. And then I learned that micromanaging is not leadership. I still have so much to learn on what it means to be a good leader, but I knew early on that I was not built to look over my team's shoulder. I was not built to make them account for every minute of every day. And if someone needs that type of supervision, then my team is not a good place for them. And finally, the biggest takeaway from my current firm is that no one's coming to the rescue. There's no magic wand. There's no silver bullet. If you find yourself not liking something about your business, then you are the one that needs to change it. Only you can take the next action that will help you build something that works for you. Thanks for listening to my very, very first podcast episode. I can't wait to talk to you again. If you need me, you know where to find me. Have a great week. Thanks for listening. I always end my weekly team meetings with "Have a great week. If you need me, you know where to find me." And I realized I said that. And with this whole podcasting thing, it's new and you may not know where to find me. Go to accountingwithconfidence.com, and while you're there, sign up for 6 easy ways to reclaim time in your accounting firm. And that will keep us connected. Have a great week.